not an alpaca. It's a llama corn. I don't understand what llamas have to do with it. Alpacas come from alpaca socks. Anyway, that was something that's bothered me. Okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about third generation cryptocurrencies. How about that? Sound good? Wow, a lot of enthusiasm. All right, so to understand third generation cryptocurrencies, you have to understand where we came from. So what was the first generation? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, you got it, Bitcoin. It's not a trick question. So what problem did Bitcoin solve? Does anybody know the problem it solved? You ask, oh, well, payments or decentralized currency. And I say, no, it's much more fundamental. The problem Bitcoin solved is the problem of delusion. Collective delusion. What the hell is that? Okay, well, what is a government? What is democracy? What is a corporation? Do they exist? Is there a particular place you can go to find the government of Hong Kong? Is it like in a building somewhere and there's like this object and you say, that's Hong Kong? No. It's just an entity constructed by consensus of the people. People come together and they choose to believe something. They choose to value something because they understand if they do this, pool that belief, those resources, that power, that will benefit everyone. Money is no different. There's nothing backing the Hong Kong dollar or the US dollar or the euro. Nothing of value. Backed by nothing but an algorithm that who the hell knows if it works or not. Created by a person nobody knows who has no real credibility and convinced the entire world that it's going to be worth something. Billions and billions of dollars. So much so that people are willing to build giant mining farms in the middle of damn nowhere. So much so that people are willing to invent elaborate scams to steal it from people. That's a pretty powerful delusion if you think about it. That is what the first generation of cryptocurrencies accomplished, is to create this notion that these devices, this cryptocurrency thing, is worth something. So what happens when people discover that there's value? They get specific and they say, well, it's valuable in general, but I want it to be valuable to me. And me is business logic. Me is a contract. Me is my dApp. Me is my DAO. Whatever the hell. You see all these people run on and say, this is my business. I have this smart contract and that smart contract. Well, guess what? You couldn't do that. Not well with Bitcoin script. Technically you could. If you had a PhD in computer science and a heck of a lot of time and a lot of effort, maybe you could find some kludgy thing to work on Bitcoin. But the reality was it's not developer friendly. And so just like when JavaScript came to the web browser, we suddenly got the Gmails and the Facebooks and the YouTubes of the world. We needed a programming language for cryptocurrencies. And that's what came with Ethereum. That was the second generation. It gave everybody a sandbox where they could dream. And they could imagine all kinds of great experiences that involve money and identity and property. So that delusion got personal. That's what the second generation did for us. Now here's what happens though when you're overwhelmingly successful with a poorly designed system. It breaks. So enter the bane of CryptoKitties, the great slayer of Ethereum. The reality is Ethereum is a replicated system, so it gains no resources as you gain people. You lose resources, so the pie gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so people said, hang on a second here. We have thousands of cryptocurrencies, we have legions of governance problems, and we have a system that's too slow for us to be able to actually process the needs of many people. We also don't really understand the difference between these private permissioned ledgers, like the hyperledgers of the world, and the enterprise Ethereums, and the Cardinas, and the Cordas, and these public blockchains that are supposed to be open to everybody. So enter the third generation. That's where we're going. So what's that all about? Why do we need to do that? Well, the third generation has three properties, I'll argue. The first is the property of scalability. And that's really the easiest of all of them to understand. It just says that when people join my system, it gets faster. Pretty simple concept. Super duper hard to do. So do we have any examples of protocols that get faster when people join them? Any ideas? So what's the #1 pirated television show in the entire world?
Game of Thrones.
You got it, sir. Game of Thrones. And how do we pirate it? You got it, BitTorrent. And why do we get that Game of Thrones so quickly? Because lots of people are downloading it. And if you download PB's Playhouse, it comes very slowly. Why? Because it's less popular. BitTorrent scales. 500 million concurrent users with this protocol, about a third of all the internet's traffic. And the more people do something, the faster it comes. That's pretty magical. And that's why it's such a successful protocol. It's why it works so well. We don't have this for any cryptocurrency at the moment. So that's the first challenge, is making our systems faster. Now, how do you make them faster? Is it just about TPS? You'll see the hash graphs and the IOTAs and the EOSs, and they come and they brag. I can do 100,000 transactions. I can do 1,000,000 transactions. I don't care. Why? Because it's not just about raw TPS. That's an engine. Is an engine a car? No. You have wheels, you have to move, right? Well, what's the engine of these systems? The network layer. Can you actually move 1,000,000 TPS? If it's a kilobyte per transaction, that's a gigabyte every single second. It has to be moved around. How does an edge node stay up to date with that if they're on a dial-up connection or 3G? You can't. So you have to trust somebody. Is that a really decentralized system? Not necessarily. So there's more to the story there. And let's say for some reason you figure out the perfect network protocol that allows you to broadcast and move all that data. Where do you store it? The security model of cryptocurrencies is the full node model. Everybody has a copy of the blockchain. So what happens when your blockchain is an exabyte? You'll have two people who have it, Google and the NSA. Pick which one you like more. So you need to figure out a way of making security work properly, availability work properly, these systems work properly, despite the fact that no one can possess the entire chain, even the big guys. It's just not an economic incentive for that. This is all interconnected to scalability. That's one of the first major problems. What are the other two? Well, they also have interoperability. No doubt, every conference you guys go to, you see some guy come up to you and say, "Ah, man, I got the most awesome coin. It's better than all the other coins, blah, 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 blah." I see it every time, every day. It's great, it's fun. And maybe some of them are wonderful. And guess what? Some will be here to stay. There's over 1,000 good cryptocurrencies, and probably thousands more that are junk. They're not going to consolidate to one. Sorry, Bitcoin. If it was going to happen, it would have been them, and they lost that fight. So that means we're going to live in an ecosystem of blockchains, an internet of blockchains, hundreds of them, and they all speak different languages. Could you imagine having 25 network protocols for Wi-Fi, and your phone only supports one? How happy would you be as you travel, go to one hotel and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you don't have Wi-Fi H. Your phone's not going to connect. Your laptop won't connect." Could you imagine that kind of a world? But that's the world we live in right now in the cryptocurrency space. Most of our chains are blind, deaf, and dumb to each other. And they say, "Oh, you can write a smart contract bridge. It costs gas, and every time you send a transaction, it's $50. And it gets more and more expensive as the value of the underlying token system goes higher. No, it doesn't work that way. So there's an interoperability question. Not just with cryptocurrencies, but also with legacy currencies as well. How the hell do I talk to JP Morgan Chase outside of calling Jamie Dimon at Take One? How do I talk to them? How do I talk to Wells Fargo? How do I talk to my credit card? You know, the stuff that you actually use to pay your bills? Most of you? How do I get interoperable with that system? It's a big challenge. And if we don't solve that challenge, how can we say that we're going to have mainstream adoption and that our system's going to win? It won't, because the consumer experience is worse than the consumer experience they already have and more expensive than the consumer experience they already have. If you don't have interoperability, you're done. Then we have the biggest problem, the hardest problem. The last two are mostly technological with some degree of industry consensus and a dose of pragmatism. You have the problem of sustainability. What do I mean by that? Put a flower in my hair, be an eco-hippie, be like, "Yes, save the planet, man." No! It's the problem of who pays and how do we decide? Who pays? Anybody here an ICO? 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 Okay, now you're paying attention. There we go. We got a couple of people raise their hand. Well, that's a good way to get started. You're just kind of creating some tokens, you sell some tokens, you get your money, You enjoy your money, then you go to jail at some point. Right? But the reality is, it's not a sustainable permanent model. You can't empower one group of people with monetary control. We do that already. It's called the central bank. They're pretty good at it. Why would we replace them? At least they have some notion of democratic consent as they're empowered by the people elected. So why then should we give it to a private company? That's a regression of society. So instead, we need a system that allows us to print money and give it to the people when they need it, how they need it, and with some notion of democracy behind it, called a treasury. Turns out that cryptocurrencies are central banks. Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin God. I think there's like 6 more, maybe in China or something, right? There's a lot of Bitcoins. Why? Well, some of them are because people are greedy bastards. Some of them are because people have legitimate disagreements. You can choose your winners and losers. And guess what? You can't go and say, hey, Ethiopia or Ghana, I'd like you to ditch your national currency and come to my system. And oh, and by the way, you have no say in the way it's going to be governed. And oh, and by the way, every now and then you're going to have a stock split in your money. And suddenly your guys have all these tokens. Oh, and by the way, if you're a US citizen, you got a tax problem too. Because apparently the fair market value may be assessed at the time of split, even though there's no liquidity, and you could be taxed at 40% or whatever the hell they do to me now. It's fun filing my taxes every year. So, that is the governance problem. It's the biggest problem, because in that, we actually have to solve a problem humanity has not solved. See, America, we have this leader. His name is Donald Trump. And our system's not working so well, and Donald Trump is a symptom of that. As is our Congress, with 9% approval rating. And other nations that run into these issues, where either the system centralizes to one person who has absolute power, or you end up getting increasingly more detached, incompetent, and corrupt politicians. So then is it reasonable to assume that somehow, because we're just so smart and cuz crypto, that we can solve these voting problems? No. And it's a hard problem. And we will never get to true decentralization if the only way to run a cryptocurrency is through cult of personality and centralization, or through the beneficence of funders. Anybody hear of the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules. It's a true rule, right? Imagine the F# Foundation. It's a programming language. Microsoft created it, funded by Microsoft. Could you imagine F# waking up one day and those guys say, you know, .NET was great, but we're going to move over to Java. Microsoft would say, well, that's a great idea. I'm glad you can get some funding from Oracle. Bye-bye. And they'll say, you know, on second thought, we'll stay on .NET. But wait, it's an open source project. It has independent governance. Why did they get influenced? That's the problem. Centralization, cult of personality, sporadic funding. These are the challenges that our space now must solve. Now, many people are trying to tackle a partial solution. Cryptocurrencies like IOTA and EOS and people like Hashgraph are attempting to resolve the scalability concern, bragging to all of the people who buy their tokens about how many TPS they can do. Maybe they can. People like Ripple and Aeon and others are trying to solve the interoperability problem. Ripple has this wonderful committee called Interledger. It's got hundreds of members. Evan Schwartz, great guy, runs it. Good ideas there. And people like Tezos and Dash and others are trying to solve the governance problem, the sustainability problem. So IOHK, my company, at our heart, is a research company. We're not even an engineering company, we're scientists. I'm a mathematician by training. And so we hire scientists, like real cryptographers. And guess what happens when you hire real scientists? Well, you write papers. And guess what you do with those papers? Put online and host a crowd sale. No, you submit them for something called peer review. And so that's what we do. We've submitted papers to Crypto, to Eurocrypt, to ACNS, Financial Crypto. Every year, you can see IOHK there. We have quite a bit of fun. And the core root of all of our papers is trying to tackle these 3 problems. For scalability, we use things like recursive internet network architecture, something called RENA, and Ouroboros. It's a proof-of-stake protocol that we think we solved all the problems of POS, or at least the relevant ones. For interoperability, we have a very dense web of sidechains papers, and they're under really wonderful names like interactive proofs of proof of work, followed by, because interaction sucks, we're all living in a basement, we don't want to talk to people, non-interactive proofs of proof of work. And of course, we have to make it work for proof of stake. So we have interactive proof of stake and non-interactive proofs of proof of stake. Long and short side chains. So we work on that. And then for sustainability, we have a whole voting lab that we set up at Lancaster University. And we think about, well, what is a good voting system? So we look at some new ideas, like liquid feedback, some old ideas, like Borda counts and Condorcet counts. And then we also look into game theory and mechanism design, the notion of rational ignorance. Why do you think that people don't really care about their vote? Because no matter how much they take it seriously, they have the same outcome. So it's rational for people not to care. Simple thing, right? So if you want people to care about cryptocurrencies and where it's going to go, you have to make them incentivized. But then how do you avoid that becoming a plutocracy ruled by the wealthy? Hard. So we think about these problems. And we have many products. We work on things like Ethereum Classic, and that's what makes me so loved in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm still waiting for that DevCon invitation. We have things like Zencash, we think about privacy, but the project that encapsulates all these three things is something called Cardano. Something we recently launched in September. It's written in the strangest of programming languages called Haskell. Anybody heard of Haskell? Maybe one or two people? Yeah, that guy in the back. Yeah, how do you like that lazy evaluation? Working out for you? He's probably an OCaml guy. So when you write it in Haskell, we use formal methods, and it's grown very fast, and it has a large, wonderful community. We've got a 5-year roadmap on it. And little by little, we're turning on features to make it more scalable, and turning on features to make it more interoperable, and turning on features to make it more sustainable. But most importantly, all those features we've been introducing into the university system. The core paper of our system was Ouroboros. And once we wrote that, we introduced it, Crypto 17, over 50 citations. And one of which was from a paper that actually figured out how to shard our protocol. It's called OmniLedger, out of Polytechnique Lausanne and Trinity College. Never even talked to us, they just wrote a paper. That's pretty cool. And to be frank, I think that's how we as a community are going to solve this problem. We live in silos right now, where everybody has their favorite project, their favorite token, their favorite thing. And these are problems bigger than any one project. These are problems bigger than any one company. These are problems that only can be solved as a collective group. So I've gone all around the world from MIT to here, and I'm going to go back again. I'll be in Europe tomorrow, in Greece, and then after that, Scotland. And I say the same thing. Let's recognize what we have to solve as a space, and then let's try to go do that. And here's the payoff. It's not for people living in Japan, and it's not for people living in Europe or in America. It's for people living in the developing world. The reality is, billions of people wake up every day, and they have a financial system where when they send money home, it costs them 15 cents on the dollar. When they go for a loan, it can cost them 85% interest. They could live on land for 2 generations, and then suddenly somebody takes it from them because somebody manipulated the property ledger due to a bribe to give it to somebody else. If you look at Syria, peace will come, always does. And the millions of refugees will come home, and they'll come home to other people living on their land, in their homes, and say, this is my house. And they say, prove it. How can they? If the government went away and destroyed all the records. That is who this technology is built for. At the end of the day, these are the people who will benefit most from our labors. You guys already have WeChat. You guys have Apple Pay and Samsung Pay. Most people have good banking services. They complain about the fees, but it works. And it's getting faster and better. And these centralized solutions are incredibly robust. And they're only going to improve an experience, especially as the world increases in globalization. But for a group of people, it just simply costs too much to get what we take for granted to them. So, if we solve the 3rd generation problems, we will build a system that works for 3 more billion people. And that system will be transparent, it won't have middlemen, and it'll operate at the lowest cost possible. And guess what? If we do that, it'll make the system we have in the Western world less competitive, and 3 billion people are going to show up to change the system that we have, instead of some entrepreneurs in a room. That's a real army. So, that's what 3rd generation is about. That's why I joined the space. Those are the challenges I think are big. They're your challenges as much as they are mine. And to quote movie from the 90s. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you guys. Cheers.